starting with Bhagavad Gita, translation and understanding as shared by Yoganandaji, verse 7. The literal translation is, Listen, too, O flower of the twice born, best of the Brahmins, about the generals of my army who are prominent amongst ourselves. These I speak about now for thine information. So here Duryodhana is addressing Drona, who is representing habit, the common perceptor of both good and evil tendencies, and Duryodhana, who represents king material desire. He is saying and addressing Drona that now I will share with you the names of the most distinguished and powerful defenders of my sense army, poised to annihilate the wisdom forces. And from here we move to verse 8, the literal translation of which is, These warriors are thyself, Drona, Bhishma, Karna, Kripa, victors in battle, Ashwathama, Vikarna, the son of Somdatta, and Jayadratha. So he says, the leaders of my sense army are thyself, Drona, habit, which is representing habit or inner tendency, Bhishma, which is the inner seeing ego, Karna, attachment, Kripa, individual delusion, Ashwathama, latent desire, Vikarna, repulsion, Somadatti, son of Somdatta, that is representing karma or material action, and Jayadratha, representing body attachment. Now here King Duryodhana, material desire, having reviewed in fear the awesome power of the rival forces of discrimination, now tries to console his alarmed mind and that of his perceptor Drona habit by describing the strength of his own army, the sent soldiers and generals arrayed to defend him. So as long as desire satisfactorily gratifies itself, it doesn't bother anyone, but desire becomes alarmed as soon as the sense-identified animal man, bound mostly by Manomaya Kosh, awakens through introspection his higher discriminative faculties, unfolds more fully the Jnanamaya Kosh with its clearer consciousness of duty and right action, then no more has desire its free sway, for these new discriminative warriors begin to interrupt desire's wayward, ungodly activity. So first here is Kripa, which represent individual delusion or avidya, which metaphorically means one who imagines matter to be other than what it is. Avidya is the first of the five klesha. This is the individual delusion, which is the ignorance in man that clouds his perception and gives him a false concept of reality. Patanjali describes it in these words, ignorance is perceiving the non-eternal impure evil and what is not soul to be eternal, pure, good and the soul. Avidya is the individual cosmic hypnosis or illusion imposed on the forms that make them express, perceive and interact with one another as though each has its own separate identity. So, in this derivation that Yoganandaji has given, he also goes on to the importance of the thoughts and the power of the thoughts to create the reality for man. So he says, by delusive imagination, the power of visualization or imagining the ego's concept, man creates his own illusions of reality and materializes or brings them into being or expression through the instrument of his differentiated consciousness, which is mind, intelligence, feeling, and sensory organs of perception and action. So Yoganandaji goes on to say that he is a miniature creature fashioning good or ill for himself, and the phenomenal world of which he is an operative part. And he says that thoughts are things and should be duly respected. So one might be in a delusion of separation from the cosmic reality, but even in that delusion, the thoughts that we are holding are equally powerful. So the delusion becomes even more dangerous at times, because what we will create would be maybe not so harmonious or not such a happy creation. And also, the influence of the force of avidya is such that no matter how irksome the illusion, deluded man is loath to part with it. So, also, Yoganandaji adds that avidya is a mighty archenemy of divine realization when under the negative influence of worldly sense inclinations. Yet, in the Mahabharata epic, we see that Kripa, the Kuru warrior general representing avidya, is one of the few survivors of the war of Kurukshetra, and that after the battle he makes peace with the Pandavas and is appointed a tutor to Parikshit, grandson of Arjuna, sole heir and progenitor of the Pandavas. The meaning is that in the creative sphere of relativity, naught can exist without this principle of individuality. If a vidya is completely withdrawn, the form that it maintains would resolve again into formless spirit. Then we come to Bhishma, which is ego or asmita. It is one who frightens, rouses, or causes the manifestation of the five tattvas, elements. The metaphorical significance is that he is the grandsire of individual existence, the cause for which form and perception of form come into being through the creative elements, tattvas, that produce the body of man and its instrument of sense perception and action. The name Bhishma derives from the Sanskrit root bhis, to frighten, by the power of this awesome force, which is reflected spirit, whose individuality identifies not with spirit but with the world of seeming. The forces of nature through the tattvas arouse from quiescence to produce and enliven a bodily instrument for expression. In the psychological metaphysical battle being described, Bhishma ego is the most powerful opponent of the Pandavas, thus igniting the greatest fears in the hearts of the spiritual forces in the spinal center that are striving to turn towards spirit to re-establish the kingdom of divine soul consciousness. Patanjali's Asmita, the second of the Kaleshas, derives from the Sanskrit Asmi, I am. It is thus egoism, the same as the allegorical Bhishma in the Gita. Asmita, egoism, is the identifying of the seer with the instrument of seeing. Ego is when the soul or seer, the image of God in man, forgets his true divine self and becomes identified with the powers of perception and action in the instruments of the body and mind. The degree of ignorance or enlightenment inherent in this identification depends on the nature of the respective instruments through which the I-ness or individuality is manifesting. When identified with the gross senses and their objects, the physical body and material world, the I-ness becomes a wisdom destroying physical ego. When identified with the subtle instruments of perception and knowledge in the astral body, the I-ness becomes a clearer sense of being, the astral ego, whose true nature may be adversely affected by the delusive influence of the physical nature, or conversely be in tune with the instrumentality of the wisdom consciousness of the causal body and thus become the discriminating ego. So the I may be identified at very gross physical body level, where we believe that we are the body, or it could be like identified deeper within us, that sense of I-ness which is beyond the body. The I-ness may also express solely through pure intuitive wisdom, the instrument of the causal body. It becomes the pure discriminating ego, or the higher expression, the soul, the individualized reflection of spirit. The soul, the purest individualized sense of being, knows its spirit identity of omniscience and omnipresence and merely uses the instrument of the body and mind as a means of communication and interaction with objectified creation. Thus, the Hindu scripture says, when this I shall die, then will I know who am I. So the devotee's advancement would be reflected on where the I is coming from, identified with the body or identified with the soul, is identity as the soul. And the third is karana, which is representing attachment or raga. Karna derives from the Sanskrit root kri, to do, to work. The metaphorical derivation, one who behaves according to his natural habitual tendency in performing actions that give pleasure. Karna signifies the propensity for pursuing material action toward which there is natural attachment because of enjoyment or pleasure derived from it. Karna is a half brother to the five Pandavas. Their common mother Kunti, before her marriage to Pandu, used her divinely given power to invoke the god Surya, the sun, through whom she was given a son, Karna. Because she was unmarried at the time, she abandoned the child who was found and raised by a charioteer and his wife. Karna became a close friend of Duryodhana and thus sided with him in the battle of Kurukshetra, even though he had learned of his true relationship with the Pandavas. Out of spite, he became the avowed enemy of the Pandavas, especially Arjuna. The significance is that Kunti, the power of invoking spiritual energy, begets an offspring from the sun, the light of the spiritual eye, which is the light from which the whole body of man, the devotee, evolves. Because this power of invoking spiritual energy, Kunti is not yet united to the divine discriminative power, or Pandu, the offspring Karna, attachment to pleasure, comes under the influence of the material sense inclination and thus sides with them in opposition to the righteous Pandava qualities. Karna feels it is his duty to be loyal to the friendship he had given to Duryodhana material desire. Raga or Karna then is the principle in the deluded man that causes him to seek that work or action to which he is attached because of the pleasure it gives him, and he justifies that action by proclaiming it to be his duty. Thus, whatever he wants to do because of his attachment to it, he can rationalize as necessary and right. And the fourth we come to is Vikarna, which is representing repulsion or Dvesha. So, Karna represents attachment, and Vikarna implies the opposite. The metaphorical derivation is one who behaves according to his natural tendency in avoiding actions that do not give pleasure, that are disagreeable. Vikarna is symbolic of the Patanjali's fourth Klesha, or its Dvesha or aversion. Ordinarily, the avoidance of suffering is a noble goal, but as applied in this context, suffering has a baser implication, that which is disagreeable. Man's ignorance, avidya, distorts his sense of right and wrong, good and evil, and creates in him the dual opposites of likes and dislikes, raga and dvesha. He is attached to what he likes and avoids what he dislikes, rather than exercising discriminative free choice and following what is truly right and best for him. Next is Jayadratha, which is representing body-bound inclination, Abnivesha. The metaphorical derivation is one who conquers by deep attachment to life, deep attachment to the continuation of one's embodied state of existence. Jayad means conquering and Ratha means chariot, that is the body. Jayadratha represents an inherent tenacity of body attachment that seeks to conquer the devotee's aspiration towards self-realization by making him cling to mortal consciousness. The next is Somdatta, that is Bhuri Shravas, material action, karma. The name Bhuri Shravas is the meaning is frequent or repeated, and stream, flow. The metaphorical derivation, that flow which frequently, repeatedly disappears. That which disappears frequently and repeatedly is obviously replaced in order to maintain its continuity. It can be likened to water in a stream, which flows by, yet the flow remains continuous because of the water flowing through which it passes. This is akin to man's action and the results accruing from them. Bhuri Shravas thus represents karma, the sixth obstacle listed by Patanjali. Here, karma means material action, that which is instigated by egoistic desire. It thus sets into motion the law of cause and effect. The action produces a result that binds itself to the doer until the cause is compensated by the appropriate effect, whether forthcoming immediately or carried over from lifetime to another. One's present condition and circumstances are a composite of current free will, initiated action, and the bondage of the accumulated effects of past actions, and causes of which have often been long since forgotten or dissociated from the results. This man laments his present misfortunes or bad luck, fate, injustice. By enduring, learning from, and constructively and spiritually working his way out of these effects, past karma is destroyed. But unless Present actions are guided by wisdom and thereby carry no binding impressions. New karmic effect will replace those that have been justly compensated. So long as karmic effects from past and present action do not fade away by being worked out or dissolved by wisdom, it is impossible to attain final emancipation. And next is Drona, addressed in this verse as Bhavan, thou, habit or sanskaras, inner tendency, vipaka, the metaphorical derivation, the fruition of actions, karma, that are dormant, that is in the subtle or melted state. So Drona represents habit, or more precisely sanskara, the impressions made on the consciousness by past thought and actions, which create strong tendencies to repeat themselves. Impressions of actions have their root or cause in the klesha, the five obstacles just described before, and are experienced in the seen, manifested in the present life, or the unseen, lying partially dormant, awaiting the right conditions, often carried over into the next or future life. From these roots, the specifics of one's rebirths are determined: what type of man, his health, his vitality, his joy and sorrows. So, the sanskaras or impressions of past actions in their subtle or melted state will ultimately, under the right conditions, come to fruition as the consequences of those actions. So, the metaphorical derivation of ashwathama or latent desire, asha, is that which remains stored up or preserved. It means that which accumulates and remains unchanged and does not perish with death as desire. Patanjali's Asha. More specifically, it is latent desire or desired seed, vasana, or the impressions of desire on the consciousness. Avidya or ignorance produces egoism. From ego arises feeling or desire, and concomitant identification with the senses and sense objects as a mean of enjoyment. This leads to desire motivated good and bad actions and their results or impressions, which in turn produce new causes and effect from one lifetime to another in a self perpetuating cycle. So long as there is no end to desire, there is no end to rebirth. In man, this desire seed or latent desire should be distinguished from active desire, which is Duryodhana, represented by Duryodhana. There is a vast difference between the two. Active desire is an impulse of the mind that produces an independent wish. This act of the mind has no roots in the subconscious. When this impulse arises fresh in the mind of the agent, it's not powerful enough that it cannot be easily checked or suppressed by a quick act of will. Every desire, however, whether acted or not, is soon followed by another. Such desires for the gratification of ego do not cease even when they are supposedly satisfied. In every worldly accomplishment or every attainment of a material possession, something always remains unfulfilled. Desire seeds are born of these ego instigated active desire. Every unfulfilled active desire, unless roasted by wisdom, plants a new desire seed in the mind. These desire seeds are more compelling than impulsive fresh desires, deeply rooting themselves in the subconscious, ready to spring up suddenly with demands that are most often unreasonable, frustrating, and sorrow producing. As desire begets desire, the only way to end the cycle is to destroy the causes. At the end of Mahabharata war, after the Pandavas' defeat of the Kurus, we find that Ashwathama has survived but is rendered powerless and is destined to roam the world forever, alone and friendless. When the yogi attains liberation, becoming irrevocably established in divine soul consciousness, his desires are like the desireless desire of spirit, having no conquering power or ability to bind the soul. The destruction of the causes of bondage, material desire, ego, habit, attachment, and so forth is thus the aim of the yogi devotee as he battles the evil Kuru forces with the divine Pandava armies of discrimination and soul power. With this, we come to end of the verse 8, and there's enormous wisdom here which can guide all of us. I feel it teaches us to be more aware of observing ourselves, from where our action is coming from, what is the origin of a desire, where we are stationed inside of us. Are we completely identified with the body, or are we stationed in our identity as souls as well? And that is the journey as described in Bhagavad Gita by Yoganandaji, that we station ourselves in our true identities and we look deeply at from where a tendency to do something is coming from. We look at these forces operating inside of us, the forces of the Pandavas, which represent the wisdom, and the forces of the Kauravas, which want to keep us bound to the sense mind, which want to keep us bound to this world of illusion. So, a deep introspection and awareness, I feel, combined with the wisdom being offered here, it gives us a great path to walk on where we'll probably feel greater and greater happiness as we let go of what is not the ultimate truth and come to what is the ultimate truth, which is us as the souls and God being the reality.